chapter 18, verse 26. Pratirudendriya prana manobodhim uparatam stanatraya param praptam brahma bhutam avikriyam. Pratirudha, restrained. Indriya, sense organs. Prana, air of respiration. Mana, the mind. Buddhim, intelligence. Uparatam, inactive. Asthana, places. Trayat, from the three. Param, transcendental. Praptam, achieved. Brahma bhutam, qualitatively equal with the absolute, supreme absolute. Vikriyam, unaffected. Translation: the Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from material activities, and he was situated in a trance apart from the three: wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. Purport: it appears that the Muni in whose hermitage the king entered was in the yogic trance. The transcendental position is attained by three processes, namely, the process of jnana, or theoretical knowledge of transcendence; the process of yoga, or factual realization of trance by manipulation of the physiological and psychological functions of the body; and the most approved process of bhakti yoga, or the engagement of senses in the devotional service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita also we have the information of the gradual development of perception from matter to a living entity. Our material mind and body develop from the living entity, the soul, and being influenced by the three qualities of matter, we forget our real identity. The jnana process theoretically speculates about the reality of the soul, but Bhakti Yoga factually engages the spirit soul in activities. The perception of matter is transcendental to still subtler states of the senses. The senses are transcended to the subtler mind, and then to the breathing activities, and gradually to intelligence. Beyond the intelligence, the living soul is realized by the mechanical activities of yoga system or practice of meditation, restraining the senses, regulating the breathing systems, and applying intelligence to rise to the transcendental position. This trance stops all material activities of the body. The king saw the Muni in that position. He also saw the Muni as follows. Translation: the Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from material activities, and he was situated in the trance apart from the three: wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. This is the description of this Brahmana who was sitting within the hut. So Parikshit Maharaj saw this particular person when he was hungry and thirsty. So the description here indicates that he was very advanced in yoga. He had restrained his senses, his pranas, his mind, his intelligence, etc. And the last line says he had attained Brahma Bhutam, stage of Brahman. So therefore very advanced. He was not a normal person or a Brahmana in name only. He actually had some serious practice he was doing, and he had achieved a state of samadhi or something similar to it at this stage. So therefore he was not an ordinary person, he was quite advanced. And because he was in this state, it would not be proper to interrupt him to say, I'm hungry or I'm thirsty, which is a very inferior state. Therefore, he should have been left in this state of trance. Prabhupada mentions in the purport here that there are three ways one can enter the transcendental position, so to speak, of trance. One is by jnana, another is by yoga, another is by bhakti yoga. Of course, the process of bhakti yoga takes one further than the other two processes in general. Our acharyas make it very clear that we explain these other processes, and even karma yoga as well, only because they are stepping stones towards bhakti. In other words, if you are really materialistic, at least you control your senses and you do karma yoga. If you control your senses long enough, then you enter a sattvic state where you're ready for more spiritual activities, and then you can embark on jnana and yoga, by which we appreciate that we're not the body, we're the soul. But that's not the end of it. We have to realize the Supreme Lord. So this is where yoga to some degree enters in, and one understands that Paramatma is there, so the yogi will meditate on Paramatma. But as we've already explained, Paramatma is a rather neutral figure involved in the material world, and therefore it's the devotees who concentrate on Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord manifests with all of his wonderful qualities in the spiritual world. So that is the final realization, and to get there you need bhakti. So the other stages, the karma, the jnana, and the yoga, are preparations for bhakti. At the same time, bhakti is independent and doesn't depend upon having to do these other processes first. So, in any case, the karma yoga is not labeled transcendental. It doesn't take you beyond the material world. But these other processes of jnana, yoga, and bhakti will take you beyond the world. And in all of when we do that, then we enter into a state of trance, because you cannot approach that position of transcendence without stopping your material senses. You can have spiritual senses, but not material senses. So in one sense, on any of these stages, whether it's the realization of Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan, you have to stop the material senses, mind, and intelligence. They cannot function in relation to that transcendental entity. So therefore, even in the yoga process defined by Patanjali, his second sutra actually is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Stop the functions of material consciousness completely, which means senses, pranas, mind, intelligence, false ego. Stop all that consciousness and everything related to it. That's the whole process of yoga for the Ashtanga yogi. So therefore, you stop everything, and then what happens? Your functions aren't operating anymore. You're hardly breathing, not aware of anything in this material world. So that's the state of samadhi or trance. So anyone who realizes Bhagavan will go into that state, as well as the other jnana and yoga practitioners. They will go into that same sort of state. But as I said, it's a little different for the devotee. His transcendental position attained is higher than that attained by the jnani and the yogi. But nevertheless, they're all transcendental in the sense they've stopped influence of material nature and material body, and the consciousness is there by itself. Even here, the third line says, Stanatraya Param. Stanatraya, as the word for word indicates the three states of consciousness in the material world: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So this is all part of Maya. So, nevertheless, they're related to the consciousness of the jiva, but they're you can say the covering states, the states that exist for the jiva when he has a subtle body and a gross body, say the waking state, a dream state, and a deep sleep state. So these are all states of material consciousness. So one has to transcend those states if one gets to the transcendental level, the state of samadhi. So there is a fourth state. It's called the turiya state, or the fourth state. So that's the state beyond these three states. That's what's talked about here. That's the samadhi state. So what is that state? It's called Brahmabhutam, the stage of realizing Brahman. So that word Brahman for the Gyanis and Yogis would indicate the impersonal feature. So even though the Paramatma Yogis accept an existence of Paramatma, they accept that person with four arms, holding conch shell and lotus, etc., in order to attain mukti, which is the Brahman state again. So they end up as impersonalists. So the Brahma, the Gyanis and the Yogis aim for this position of realizing Brahman, or liberation, which is the impersonal state. So that state is considered to be without material activities, without material effects. It's beyond the material world. The devotee, however, when he enters into his trance, what is his Brahmabhuta? Of course, we can say he does also attain that state because he transcends the material world. So whatever is available for the Jnani and the Yogi, that is detachment from karma and material concepts, he attains that. But he has a higher state of realization because he realizes not Brahman, impersonal aspect of the Lord, but personal aspect of the Lord, Bhagavan. So that's also indicated by the word Brahman. So the how can one word indicate opposite things? God with form, God without form. How can one word Brahma indicate that? So the if we go by the very literal or definition of the word Brahman means that which is great. So in other words, some supreme entity, that's all it means. So it could be supreme entity named Brahman, which is beyond material world, or it can be the ultimate supreme entity, Bhagavan. So in other words, the same word could mean several things, just as the word Atma means self, and if you're in the material world, self means body. So then we say, well, I protect myself, means I'm protecting my body. So that word Atma can be used for the body. It can also be used for the mind, Atma, concentrate the mind. So we talk about controlling the Atma or controlling the mind. But then it can also mean, Atma can also mean Brahman. But it can also mean Supreme Lord. You see Paramatma, the Supreme Lord, because he's the ultimate self. He's the self within yourself. He's the soul within your soul. So he's the ultimate Atma. So by taking words themselves, we can't just give one meaning to them. Sometimes we can give several meanings to them according to the context. So if we say the devotee reaches Brahmabhuta, then obviously he's not merging into Brahman. He surpasses that state, but he does realize Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is also Brahman. In normal usage, of course, we use that word Brahman to indicate the impersonal state. But if we go to something like the Brahma Sutras, it starts at Tato Brahma Jigasa. Now that you're a human being and you've transcended karma yoga, you should inquire about Brahman. You should go beyond Brahman and karma yoga, beyond karma yoga, and start inquiring about Brahman. So then that's the subject of the whole Vedanta Sutras, or Brahma Sutras. And then the next question would be, well, what is that Brahman? So then the next sutra answers, Janmadasya Yataha. Brahman is that from which everything arises, within which everything is maintained, and within which everything is destroyed. That is Brahman. So we can take that Brahman as this impersonal Brahman, or we can take it as Bhagavan. Of course, our Vaishnavacharyas, like Ramanujacharya, he says, what does this Brahman mean? It means Vishnu, Parabrahman. Or Nambarka will say, Brahman means Krishna. And similarly, our commentary on Brahma Sutras written by Baladev says, yes, Brahman means Krishna. So in any case, it means Bhagavan. And for the Vaishnavas, Brahman, Tata Brahmajigasa, you should inquire about Brahman, means you should inquire about Bhagavan, Supreme Personality of Godhead, not the impersonal Brahman. That's what we should do. So therefore that one word can be interpreted both ways. And Shankaracharya takes it as the impersonal, and then this whole commentary on Brahma Sutras is about the impersonal Brahman. Whereas the Vaishnavas take that word Brahman as meaning Bhagavan, and therefore they give commentary on the whole Bhagavatam, Brahma Sutras, in terms of talking about Vishnu or Krishna. So words themselves could have a variety of meanings, and according to context, or according to the person who wants to get a meaning, he could get a variety of meanings. And that is why even in the Bhagavatam we need the commentaries of acharyas in order to clarify exactly what these words mean, because other people will give various meanings, and this will be very confusing for us. So, therefore, there's not always one meaning. There's a variety of meanings, and the acharyas will choose which is the appropriate meaning in the particular circumstance. So we go by their judgment here. So for the persons like this rishi here, it appears he was doing yoga, etc., and therefore he entered into this impersonal state. Whereas for the devotees, they would enter into a state of perceiving the Supreme Lord. So in the purport, Prabhupada discusses how the process of yoga is a process of stopping the senses and the mind and the pranas and the intelligence. And with mechanical means, that is asanas, breath control, etc. So we're kind of using the body to do that. The result is you can get a result. It's a practical means by which you can enter into that state of samadhi. And therefore this process became very popular with many people in ancient times. And it became not just a practice, it also had a philosophical aspect to it. And so it's that philosophical aspect which became one of the 6 darshanas, we call the sub-darshanas. There's famous philosophical groups in ancient India like Sankhya and Karma Mimamsa. So yoga is one of them, Patanjali's yoga system. So apart from the practice, also the philosophy of that also became quite prominent at a certain point in time in India. And the original text is Patanjali Yoga Sutras. It starts from that. So it became popular as a philosophical group, and then it had its practical aspect, which resulted in yogis. And of course, that is a very common impression we have of yoga. There's some person with long hair and raggedy cloth running around in the Himalayas meditating, or going to Kumbh Mela or whatever like this. Is the yogi. So it's still available today. There are people like that. We can't say they're all genuine, but at least there's a few of them that are quite serious about their practice. They're doing yoga of some sort. Of course, this may be mixed with various things, with various other philosophies or whatever. But the practice is still going on even now, that practice of yoga. And through that, their whole goal is to enter into this state of impersonal Brahman. So it is continued even to the present day. So there is, we can say, practical results for some people. Prabhupada here describes the jnana process as they speculate about the reality of the soul theoretically. So it's more like a mental or an intellectual exercise for them. And if we look at the way that jnana approaches things, we see it does have a large amount of argumentation and logical explanation of things. So Shankaracharya actually established a whole logical process. You could say refined in one sense of argumentation, because he had to argue against Buddhists who were very strong argumenters. So they could defeat everybody and say that ultimately nothing exists using logic. So then Shankaracharya didn't accept that nothing exists, so he said Brahman exists. So he established argumentation for that. So he had to produce the whole system of logic to defeat the Buddhists. So that's how we'd say the logical ability entered into there. So logic also requires intelligence, whatever. So a lot of the texts of the Gyanis depend on logic, and that's why they're called Gyanis, or it's called Jnana Yoga, because it's basically a study of scripture, particularly Upanishads, to come out with the proper meaning. And to do that, then they have to use all sorts of logical arguments to do that. So it's quite intellectual. Of course, they can also realize, but it's we can say it arises by a little bit different means than yoga. Yoga, as he says, is a practical process in which you renounce things and you do yoga practice and meditate. So the Jnani is largely this discussion of Vedanta, and discussion of Brahma Sutras and Upanishads to come out that you're not the body or the soul and this is some eternal substance, etc., like that. Ultimately, of course, they do also renounce control their senses, etc. And they may also meditate or whatever. But it's largely intellectual. And in either case, both of them are headed towards this impersonal state. Now, the yoga process in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes as being superior at the end of chapter 6. Then he says, jnana is superior to karma, but yoga is superior to jnana. And of course, bhakti is superior to yoga. So he puts it in a little bit higher position there. One reason maybe because it's, as Prabhupada points out here, it's more practical and you can get to that realization much easier than by intellectual means. The other point, of course, is that they do accept the Paramatma feature of the Lord to some degree. If we look, of course, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, there is some mention of that Paramatma or Ishvara, Supreme Lord, but it's not very prominent. And some of our acharyas, like Bhaktivinoda, explain that it's rather a superficial admission of a Paramatma with not too great attachment to him. And in Bhagavatam also it explains that the yogi may realize Paramatma, and he will if he wants to get liberation, but then he does not become attracted to him because he's more attracted to the impersonal realization. So he gets the mercy of Paramatma by his realization in order to merge into Brahman. So he gives up his attachment, or what could be an attachment to the Lord, and he just uses the Supreme Lord to enter into Brahman. As we know, one cannot get liberation, even impersonal liberation, without the mercy of the Lord. So the yogi realizes that, and he'll worship that Paramatma to get his mercy. When he gets his mercy, merge in Brahman. I think Jiva Goswami explains also that the Paramatma yogi, he may realize Paramatma, but then he may merge into his effulgence, which is merging into Brahman.
Or, worse, he may merge into Paramatma himself. He says that's even worse because he identifies himself with the Paramatma. So these are the destinations of the yogi who realizes Paramatma. He doesn't have attachment to him as a personal form, and therefore he merges into him. But it's superior in the sense that at least there's some personalism there. And if that yogi who accepts Paramatma gets association of devotees, then he can change. And instead of trying to merge into Paramatma, then he'll want to worship that form. And when he does that, then that form becomes Bhagavan. If he develops a little devotion and he starts trying to attain that form of the Lord, then it becomes a Bhagavan form. Of course, in the Nectar Devotion there it explains in Shantarasa that these people who have a little bit of vairagya and yoga mixed with their sadhana of bhakti, then they get up to Shantarasa. So they realize the Lord, but it's quite neutral, peaceful, very peaceful, which is the aspect of Brahman coming in there. So, in this sense, it's superior to the Gyanis. Jnana also, there's a problem there because many Gyanis will outright offend the Lord because they reject that he has a form. So if you say the Lord doesn't have a form, you're more or less kicking the Lord in the face, so to speak. So it's an offense. So if you say the Lord has no form, qualities, activities, basically you're offending the Lord. So therefore, the possibility of an impersonal liberation becomes impossible. So it's not all Gyanis, but some Gyanis would be like that. Sukadeva Goswami was also more or less whether it was a Paramatma Gyani or a normal Gyani, whatever, it looked like he wasn't at least a real impersonal Mayavadi type Gyani. Because he accepted the advice of Krishna when he was in the womb. He didn't want to come out because he said, look, this is a material world, it's all Maya. Why should I come out? I don't want to look at anything in this material world. I start looking at things, I'll get involved in it, and I'll get attracted and fall down. So I'll simply stay in the womb and I won't see anything, and I'll be very happy here. So in that sense, he was a Gyani or a Brahma Gyani or whatever, Atmarama, so to speak. But he didn't necessarily reject the Lord also. He wasn't offensive. So Vyasadeva was trying to get him out of the womb. He wouldn't come. And he gave this excuse, if I come out, I'll get affected by Maya. And then Vyasadeva didn't have any answer to that. So then Sukadeva stayed there in the womb of his mother for many, many years. So finally, Vedavyas went to Dwarka, and he talked to Krishna, and he told Krishna, you have to come and persuade this boy to come out of the womb. So then he took Krishna to his Himalayan abode. And then Krishna began to speak to him. He said, why don't you want to come out? And he said, I don't want to come out because if I come out, it's this useless Maya world. I'll get affected by it and I'll fall down or whatever. So why should I come out? And so Krishna answered, well, I guarantee that you come out, you will not get affected. So then Sukadeva, he accepted Bhagavan Krishna. So, and it's his word promise. So therefore, there was no excuse for him anymore. Because he had the promise of the Lord, you'll not fall down in the material world. So he had to come out. But even when he came out, he was still completely unattached to anything in the material world, as expected, because that was the promise. So it's described here in the Bhagavatam how when he was born, he walked away. He didn't even look at his father and his mother. He just walked away from the house, walked out of there, walked into the forest. Didn't even look at them. And his father was calling out to him, come back, come back. Like this. He didn't answer. He just kept walking into the forest and disappeared there. So that was his state. He was impersonalist, the Atmarama, Brahman state. But he was not offensive to the Lord in any way. So that was his good quality. So then, of course, that story is told to show that ultimately the Atmarama, persons who have a realization of impersonal, even they become attracted to hearing the pastimes of the Lord and the qualities of the Lord. So the Lord is so attractive that even the Atmaramas get attracted to him. That's one quality of the Supreme Lord. And therefore we have the Atmarama verse in the Bhagavatam to illustrate that. So what happened was that Vyasadeva, because he's omniscient, he knew exactly where Sukadeva was meditating under some tree in the forest. So he told his disciples, you go to that particular place in the forest, and then you see him. He'll be in a trance in his meditation, just like the Rishi is here. His senses completely controlled on his Brahmabhuta platform, whatever. Very peaceful. And you begin reciting Srimad Bhagavatam to him. So the disciples followed that advice, and they went into the forest, and they followed its directions, and sure enough they found Sukadeva sitting in the forest very peacefully in samadhi. And so they began reciting Srimad Bhagavatam. When Sukadeva heard the Bhagavatam, or you couldn't say he was in trance, so in one sense he couldn't hear, but it was so attractive, the descriptions of Krishna, that he had to hear. His senses made him hear it. And then he went out of his trance. Finished. Yeah, so even the Atmarama is attracted to the discussion of the qualities and pastimes of the Lord. So after that, he went out of his trance, and then he was taken by the disciples back to the ashram of Vedavyas, and then Vyas told him the whole Bhagavatam. So that's how he got to know the Bhagavatam. So therefore, the person who is in trance may advance by that, if he doesn't offend the Supreme Lord in any way, whether it's a yogi or a jnani. If he doesn't offend the Lord, then he has a possibility of getting mercy of devotees in Krishna, and then he can advance and he come to the level of Vaishnava or devotee. So that is why we have these processes: karma yoga, jnana yoga, stanga yoga, bhakti yoga. One should lead to the other ultimately, and we should get to the bhakti yoga process. However, as Krishna points out at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dhamman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Braja, after explaining karma yoga in chapter 2 and 3, and jnana yoga even in chapter 2 and in chapter 4 and in chapter 5, and Astanga yoga in chapter 6, then he gives 6 chapters to bhakti yoga, 7 through 12. And at the end he says, give up everything and just do bhakti yoga. Just surrender unto me. That's the bhakti yoga. So therefore, you don't have to do these other processes to get to bhakti. You can just do bhakti. That's the alternative. And in chapter 12, Krishna makes that clear, because Arjuna says, should I concentrate on this impersonal, undefinable substance, which means Brahman, or should I simply worship you in devotion? And Krishna says, it's quicker and easier if you worship me in devotion. Very quickly I will deliver you from the ocean of samsara. So that's repeated at the end, where Krishna says, give up everything and just surrender to me. So in other words, even without doing these other processes, you can just do the bhakti process, and you get this highest result, which includes going beyond material world, so you get that Brahma Bhuta, plus you get the higher realization of Para Brahman Bhuta, the supreme realization. So therefore bhakti can go either way, either through the gradual process, through practicing karma, jnana, stanga yoga, then bhakti, or simply get up to the bhakti process by itself without having to do the other process beforehand. And either way is you become successful, but quicker and easier simply to take the bhakti process. So that is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommends. You simply chant the holy name. You don't have to go through karma, jnana, yoga, etc. Just take the process of bhakti, and you get the perfection, the highest perfection. Okay, any question?
Thank you, Maharaj, for your informative class. I have a couple of questions. The fact that the yogis and the jnanis see Paramatma, they meditate on Paramatma, although, within every heart, Paramatma is there, covered by yoga mind, but they actually meditate and they see Paramatma with his, four hands and things. But yet they don't develop, it's kind of astounding that they don't develop that attraction. But then you were explaining that, like with Sukadeva, he had that realization, but he had to hear hear the Bhagavatam.
Yeah, he got a real attraction to Bhagavan. Yeah.
So is that kind of an indication of the much higher potency of hearing than seeing? That someone can see Krishna in his four-handed form, but not get attracted that by hearing.
Well, we can say the mercy of devotees. Maybe we can say the mercy of devotees that invokes the, feeling for the Supreme Lord. If we don't have sadhu sangha and mercy, then generally we don't develop bhakti. Sukadeva, if he didn't get devotional association somehow or other, of course he got Krishna's association because Krishna spoke to him in the womb. Then he got the association through hearing from the disciples. Huh? So the hearing process itself means association. So therefore, mercy of devotees is important to develop the bhakti process. So if the Jnani or the yogi gets the mercy of devotees somehow or other, they get association, and then the devotees speak to them, and then they can develop. In other words, it needs that the Sravana process and the hearing process is very important for them. But that takes place through the sadhu sangha, the mercy of devotees. If they hear from the wrong persons, they're not going to get that. So they have to hear from devotees. Then they get the impetus to do bhakti. In other words, mercy of devotees is important to the cause. So even if we aren't a yogi or a jnani or a karmi even, but we get the mercy of devotees, again we can develop. So if we hear, or even before the hearing, if we just take prasadam even, that helps us. So many things besides the hearing, but hearing is very important because through that we get bhakti jnana, we get knowledge of bhakti and knowledge of Krishna directly. Whereas the other, like prasadam, it affects us and helps us get faith, but we do need that a little bit of knowledge also, scriptural knowledge. So the hearing process is important for that. But it has to come through devotees. If it comes through a non-devotee, then it will not have that effect. In other words, somebody could recite the whole Bhagavatam, but if it's one of those Bhagavat Saptahas or whatever, it may not affect you in the right way. Or if it's somebody who has an impersonal interpretation of Bhagavad Gita and hear Bhagavad Gita, then it's not going to make you into a devotee also. But if you hear from a devotee, then different effect.
Thank you, Maharaj. And also, Prabhupada often used to say, prepare in your heart a place for Krishna to reside, by the process of Bhakti Yoga. And, in the third canto, it's talking about how Krishna will appear within the heart according to the form that the Bhakta worships. I'm just wondering that the super soul is sitting there, kind of covered by his yoga maya. So at that point where the change, when Krishna sort of manifests, I assume that's when the devotee has kind of achieved praying or power or praying or something.
Well, we see previous to this, it talks about the different stages. So at one stage it talks about, sadhu sangha. It's, I think in the case of Narada Muni, sadhu sangha, and then he developed and whatever. And then it talks about, you go through anartha nivritti, and it says that Krishna in the heart, he takes away all of your anarthas, anartha nivritti stage. But then, of course, we don't have a realization of Krishna at that stage. But I think Vishnu says in his commentary, yes, because we hear about Krishna. At least that starts the whole process. So we don't have a realization at that stage, but at least there's some attraction for Krishna. So that attraction through the hearing process helps us to get rid of anarthas, etc. The final realization will be, and of course, bhava is the initial realization, and then prema is the perfect realization. So the actual manifestation, but not just in the heart, he comes outside also, directly, he also manifests to the devotee at that stage. Yeah?
Thank you very much.
In this verse it talks about the alternative consciousness aside from the waking, dreaming and deep sleep. Does that mean the yogi, the Brahmavadi yogi or Bhakta is totally in a different consciousness all of the time, doesn't experience that free consciousness at all?
What he gets out of his trance, you see?
So it's only when he's in trance that he's in that
Well, if they get into that deep trance, then yes, then they're in that fourth state, the Turiya state.
But otherwise they go through the same process as everybody else.
Yeah, and then when they come out of trance and they're back in the material world and they go through this type of situation. However, if a person has advanced very much, then even if he comes up into the normal world, he doesn't function like a normal person. His senses, he's not really using his senses like a normal person anymore. So this is what we call the Jivan Mukta state. However, you can fall from that state. The impersonalists can fall from that state also, if he offends the Lord. But at least their body is operating, etc. But it's they have no attachment to the body at all. They're kind of going on almost as if in a trance state of that. Just like in for the person in bhava and prema, they're not like normal people in this world, and they look crazy because they're not acting like us with the normal sense activities, etc. They don't see and interact in the normal way, not at all interested in their material bodies.
Another question. You mentioned, and you mentioned again, that when Sukadeva Swami, he was distinct because he wasn't offensive to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But you can argue that running away from your father, who is a great exalted sage, Satyavacharata, and that's quite rude and offensive.
Well, in that sense, we can say, yeah, of course, he was also an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. So, but I think the idea is there that he was unattached to the fatherly aspect of that, because he was saying, "Oh my son, oh my son." So that, and then we see that the description is given here in Bhagavatam how the young women were bathing in the river, and Sukadeva went by, and they were just completely, they didn't care because they understood he was completely detached. And when Vyasadeva came, they were thinking, okay, cover themselves up a little bit. They were embarrassed because his consciousness was a little different. So Sukadeva was on a very, very detached platform. Of course, this is all pastimes in one sense, because Vyasadeva is also a form of the Lord. We can never say he's in Maya, but he was playing a particular role. And obviously, Sukadeva was also playing a role at that point. But the same thing will also appear in the material world with persons in bhava and prema, that they'll become completely detached from their family duties, and therefore they'll get condemned by the family members or society. You're not doing your duties. You're not supporting your family. So normally, of course, the devotee is very conscientious, and he's encouraged to do his duties as a grihasta, to support his family, etc., and do the bhakti along with that. That's the normal process. But at that stage, he can no longer do that. He's not even conscious of them, because he's completely absorbed in Krishna. So therefore, we cannot blame him for that. He's just at that stage where he's not even aware of these things anymore. So therefore, that's why he doesn't take care. So it's his higher state, and we cannot criticize that state. It's not because they want to be cruel to anybody, they run away from their family or whatever. It's just they're completely attached to Krishna, and that's all they see. So therefore, everything else makes no sense anymore.
There is what you just said, there's a section in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually questions Srivas, and he says, "How do you make money?"
Yeah.
And he says, "I just clap my hands. If something comes, it comes." He's like that. He's in that kind of trance.
Yeah.
Where they didn't really work, I think.
Yeah.
Just, because when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu questioned him,
Yeah.
he said, "I just clap my hands. If something comes, I eat that. If nothing comes, I don't eat." So he's that kind of trance as well.
It's in relation to, you mentioned how yogis and impersonalists, they search for the same goal. But I'm not trying to contradict you, but I've never read that. I read all through the Bhagavatam so many stories in which sages go to meditate and they go through the process of Ashtanga Yoga, and then it describes how they go to the spiritual planets, the whole process. And
Yeah, they can, if they get, but they need to do bhakti also. You can't just go by yoga. You need the mercy of the Lord somewhere.
But Ashtanga Yoga involves remembering God, which is Smarana.
Yeah, so if they do that without offense, yeah, then they can realize him. And if they keep that and they don't reject him, then yes, they can go to, that's what I said, they can get up to Shantarasa or something like that in the spiritual world.
So the aim, because I understood at the beginning that you were saying that the aim of the impersonalist and the yogis is the same, it's impersonal.
In general, and as far as practice is concerned, and if you go to the Kumbh Mela, for instance, and you ask them what is their goal, all these different yogis with the long hair, basically it will end up with the impersonal, not the personal.
Oh yeah, but I'm not talking about Kumbh Mela, I'm talking about the stories in the Bhagavatam, all those sages that go through the process of Ashtanga Yoga.
Yeah,
and they're aiming at God.
Yeah. Of course, in Bhagavad Gita, I think chapter 8 there, in the, I think chapter verse 6 onwards there, he describes how they concentrate their mind, concentrate in the center between their eyebrows, so then the commentary there is this is like a mixture of bhakti and yoga. Yeah? So, and then they can attain the supreme. So they're doing bhakti and yoga. Very good. If it's prominently bhakti and prominently yoga, little bhakti, then generally they'll probably get into the impersonal aspect. If it's a mixture, then they can get up to, and if it's prominently bhakti and a little bit of yoga, then of course they can maybe get to Vaikuntha and Samrasa also even. So depends on the mixture.
There is not any verse in the Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita that says that yogis and impersonalists, they have the same impersonal aim.
No, it can be different.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be different.
Because also the fact of dharana, jnana, and samadhi is bhakti, because you're concentrating on God. You're not just concentrating on the...
Well, samadhi can also mean the impersonal samadhi, like nirvikalpa samadhi for the impersonalist means just enter in Brahman, that's it.
Yeah, but the Ashtanga Yoga normally is dhyana, which is meditation on Ishvara, isn't it?
Well, part of it, but then, as I said, Patanjali does not really emphasize him too much. He talks about Ishvara Pranidhan there and Ishvara a little bit, but not too much.
Well, he says like that, not too much.
Well, he just doesn't become a prominent aspect. It's there mentioned, but he doesn't dwell too much on that. So therefore, it becomes more, for many who read those works, they get more interested in the impersonal than personal. Okay, Hare Krishna.